One of Sauron's greatest skills was his ability to deceive others, whether it was getting them to betray their friends, getting them to do his bidding, or even into straight up worshipping him. But in the Second Age, as Annatar, Sauron encountered difficulty in deceiving the elves, with both High King Gil-galad and Galadriel both rejecting him. But he found success in deceiving Celebrimbor, and together they would craft the Rings of Power, which would have a major impact over the next 5,000 years. So in this video, let's look at how Sauron managed to deceive Celebrimbor. After Morgoth's fall, Sauron was in a difficult position. He briefly considered seeking redemption, but this was not to be. Sauron had spent too long in the service of Morgoth and had picked up too many bad traits. On top of that, his initial ambition of ordering everything towards some grand design for Middle-earth had not gone away, but to achieve this grand design he would need servants, those who had the capability of ordering everything perfectly for his vision, and none had more capability than the elves, specifically the Noldor who were part of Gil-galad's new kingdom. So in 1200 of the Second Age, Sauron, wearing the fair guise of Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, journeyed into the elven lands in the west of Middle-earth. These journeys yielded mixed results. Sauron's emissaries and then Sauron himself were turned back from Lindon. For one reason or another, High King Gil-galad and his lieutenant Elrond did not trust this so-called Lord of Gifts, but in other places Sauron had more success, specifically in Eregion. At this time, Eregion was ruled by Celeborn and Galadriel, and although Galadriel did not trust Annatar, he was not banned from Eregion, and this is where Annatar would meet Celebrimbor. For those who don't know, Celebrimbor was the son of Curufin and the only grandson of Feanor, but unlike his father and most of his uncles, Celebrimbor was of good character. He did not have temperamental issues, he did not swear the oath of Feanor, and he even denounced the crimes of his father and his uncle Celegorm after their deeds in Nargothrond. He chose to stay behind and did not take part in the other kinslayings. With the exception of Maglor, who vanished, Celebrimbor was the last surviving member of the House of Feanor in the Second Age. One thing Celebrimbor did inherit was his father and grandfather's skill and love for crafting. Celebrimbor was an incredibly skilled craftsman. In Eregion, he founded the group known as the Gwaith Ar Myrdain, the people of the Jewelsmiths, and he was the greatest among them. Along with Galadriel, he also played a major role in establishing a friendship with the dwarves of Khazad-dûm. The Ithildan writing on the doors of Durin were made by him. But Celebrimbor had some insecurities. A major one is that he wanted to rival the skill and fame of his grandfather Feanor, but as good as he wasn't able to achieve this by himself. Nothing he made could be considered as impressive as the Silmarils. And like Galadriel, Celebrimbor wanted to preserve the magic and beauty that was slowly fading in Middle-earth. Interestingly enough, in some writings, Celebrimbor had once loved Galadriel, and although she chose Celeborn, he was still good friends with her afterwards. When Galadriel expressed her dismay at the fading of Middle-earth, Celebrimbor vowed to find a way to keep her happy. He did this in a minor way with the crafting of the Elendilmir, and later, it seems that the conversation with Galadriel inspired his eventual creation of the 3 Elven Rings. So when Annatar showed up, you can see how it would have been Christmas for Celebrimbor. Sauron had once been a Maiar in the service of Aule, so he was a crafter of legendary skill himself. Celebrimbor has no idea of Annatar's true identity though, so all he sees is someone who can help him in 2 things. A. Help him surpass everyone, including Feanor, in terms of craft, and B. He sees someone that can help him delay or even halt the fading of Middle-earth. The only obstacle hindering this partnership was Galadriel. Like I said before, she did not trust Annatar, but we're not told why. At the very least, she couldn't have known his actual identity, as she still permitted him to remain in Eregion. So when Annatar began going to Celebrimbor and the Gwaith Ar Myrdain, he had to do so in secret. Sure, he made good on his promise, teaching them his arts and increasing their skill, but he also gradually influenced them to revolt against Galadriel and Celeborn. This eventually happened between 1350 and 1400, but to Celebrimbor's credit, this was a bloodless coup. Galadriel and Celeborn stepped down as Lord and Lady of Eregion. Galadriel passed through Khazad-dûm and stayed in Lorinand, but Celeborn refused to pass through and stayed in Eregion. In classic Celeborn fashion, he was deemed as irrelevant and was disregarded by both Celebrimbor and Annatar. With the obstacle removed, Annatar could work with the Gwaith Mirdain openly, and nearing 1500, they were the greatest craftsmen in the world, although they were still not at Feanor's level. It was around this time where Annatar instructed the Gwaith Mirdain in the creation of the Rings of Power, the 7 and the 9. The official reason behind these rings was to increase the power and skill of the one who bore it. The unofficial reason for Annatar was that these rings would be linked to the future One Ring, and the person using the One Ring could effectively dominate and mind control the bearers of the lesser rings. Shortly afterwards, Annatar departed Eregion, never to return under that guise again. To give credit to Celebrimbor, he was never corrupted in heart and mind. Him pushing Galadriel and Celeborn out of power was done partially out of selfishness. He wanted to become greater than Feanor, and the only way he could do that was with Annatar's help. But at the same time, his initial goal of preserving Middle-earth and making it fairer never went away. He proved this with the creation of the 3 Elven Rings 90 years later. They were forged using Sauron's arts, but without Sauron's help, so they were good Rings of Power. His creation of the 3 turned out to be extremely important, because 10 years after that, when Sauron created the One Ring, it was through the use of the 3 that Celebrimbor realized the backdoor that Sauron had created to dominate all the other Rings of Power. In that moment, Celebrimbor realized that he had been deceived, and he became aware that Annatar was actually Sauron. And to give Celebrimbor even more credit, he would then spend the rest of his life attempting to redeem himself for falling for the deception. While he could not bear to destroy his creations, he did follow Galadriel's advice by hiding the 3 by giving them away to Galadriel, Gil-galad, and Círdan. He refused to negotiate with Sauron when he demanded the other Rings of Power, and valiantly defended the House of the Mirdain against Sauron himself during the sack of Eregion. Under torment, he did give away the location of the 7, as they were sullied by Sauron, but of the 3 he said nothing, and realizing that Celebrimbor would say no more, Sauron had him put to death. His body was then used as a banner by Sauron's forces as they marched forth from Eregion. This isn't to say that fault shouldn't be placed at the feet of Celebrimbor. Ultimately, he was the one who gave Sauron a chance at corrupting the elves from within. That was a major mistake, but at least it was an honest mistake. Sure, Celebrimbor's insecurity about being lesser than his grandfather meant that his collaboration with Annatar was partially due to a selfish desire for glory and advancement, but at the same time, even with all the skill and knowledge that Annatar gave him, Celebrimbor was not corrupted, and he did not lose sight of his initial goals. The 3 Elven Rings were not weapons of war, they were preservers of beauty, and that's what Celebrimbor wanted to do. I think all of this makes Celebrimbor an incredibly tragic character. He was not the mightiest of the House of Feanor, nor was he the most skilled, but he was the best in nature, and that was what allowed him to outlast the rest of them. But in the end, his need to match up to his grandfather and his desire to do good caused him to allow the monster into the house. During those years with Annatar, he would have genuinely believed that he was going to achieve everything he ever wanted, to be the greatest craftsman of all time, and to use those skills to make sure the elves would not have to leave Middle-earth. Once he realized he was betrayed, I'm sure that guilt, the guilt from being naive enough to do a deal with the devil, was what made him fight to the very last to protect what he had created. If there was perhaps one thing he could have been proud of before the end, is that even though he unwittingly helped Sauron with his plan of dominating the elves by forging the Rings of Power, he at least also unwittingly foiled that plan by forging the 3. And when Sauron lost the One Ring at the end of the Second Age, the 3 would play a major role in allowing the elves to stay in Middle-earth until the end of the Third Age, and play their role in the destruction of Sauron. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. In case you couldn't tell from the video, I have a soft spot for poor Celebrimbor. I think my perfect version of him would be the looks from Shadow of War, with the personality of Rings of Power's Celebrimbor. Speaking of that show, I'm both interested and a little scared in what they do with him in the upcoming second season. I hope he gets some justice, and maybe we get a heroic moment or two before the end. Spoilers. Cheers, farewell, and remember, if a guy calls himself the Lord of Gifts, do a background check because that's a real weird thing to call yourself.